Sean Malone Khalifa. On today's episode, we cover school shootings in America. Our guest for today's episode is Jennifer Ponce. Jennifer Ponce, may you please introduce yourself to the California Island podcast listeners?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Ponce. I'm a teen dating violence expert.
Okay. I can say from my viewpoint as an incarcerated individual in America that school shootings flash across my television screen quite often. History tells us that we can stop a problem if we put our creative minds together. What, in your opinion, is the reason we are unable to come up with a solution to this problem?
The reason why we can't come up with a solution is because people are looking at school shootings as a gun violence issue, when in reality it's a mental health issue. So some of the solutions that they're bringing to the table, things like, well, why don't we just put more guns in schools? Why don't we ban guns altogether? And none of that's going to solve the problem because it has nothing to do with the weapon of choice, and it has everything to do with the emotional and psychological well-being of our students.
That is a very valid point that I haven't heard anyone make before. So, if you don't mind, what does a school shooter's home look like? What does their home life look like?
Well, we know a lot of violence is a learned behavior, especially domestic violence and teen dating violence, and we know that violence is cyclical. So if I'm coming from a home where one of my parents wants to dominate the family or have power and control, and a lot of times we'll see a lot of emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and physical abuse come from homes like that. And if children are learning that that's the way you resolve conflict, sometimes we're going to see that play out in their own personal, intimate relationships, whether that's with their friendships, or their boyfriends or girlfriends. It also, coming from a home where there's a high intensity of stress and anxiety, a lot of these kids have a hard time self-regulating their emotions. And since we do live in a world that's digital and it's extremely disconnected, a lot of these kids have a hard time having an emotional connection or even seeking help or resources before something gets to the point where they're turning to using a weapon and killing other kids.
Seeing that is the case, how do we reach this kid before they decide to kill people?
I think a lot of support and education and kind of what I do, educating people on the topic of domestic violence and violence in the home, also mental health awareness and mental health advocacy. So, you know, a lot of our kids right now are experiencing heightened amounts of anxiety and stress. I mean, I see it in my own professional role. And the solution is just to medicate them and really not to help give them the tools that they need to navigate life and be able to help self-regulate and correct some of their own stressors without using medication. So I think a lot needs to be done as far as mental health policy, making sure that our kids do have healthy outlets, making sure that our kids are learning healthy social interaction, and that, you know, teachers are more aware. If our teachers and our counselors could assess for some of these issues, educating, advocating, and providing resources. I think that's what needs to happen first and foremost before we eliminate or add more guns to the equation.
That makes perfect sense. What advice would you give to parents who are having trouble communicating with their children?
Personally, I think parents need to help their kids disconnect from their social media and from the digital world. And I think parents can have a huge impact by just being involved and engaged in their child's life and also eliminating judgment. So when they talk to their kid about their day, you know, really wanting to know what's happening in their life. A lot of kids are afraid to go to their parents because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble or they're going to be judged. There's also a lot of pressure to excel and be successful in school and to move on to, you know, traditional learning institutions like for universities. And I think if parents removed some of those barriers of communication, it would foster a lot more healthy relationships for those kids and also relationships outside of their family unit.
All right. Politics seem to allow so much injustice to occur in America. Is there any ideas you have on how we can introduce a bit of humanity back into politics? Or not back into politics, but actually into politics?
Well, it's hard because a lot of our politics are driven by, you know, lobbyists and what they call special interest groups, you know, some money. And not to get political on your show, but that is sometimes what fuels a lot of
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Our policy and the direction it's heading, but that's the importance of like civil rights groups, of advocacy groups, of people who don't have a special interest that's tied to any type of financial gain, who are just focused on, humanity in and of itself, kind of me and my role, in my professional role. We do a lot. We spend a lot of time with our influencers and our lawmakers, just educating them on the issue and the trends and what we're seeing. And hopefully, if we can educate them enough when they do go to creating laws and voting on laws, it does bring some of that humanity and that side back into their policy and decision making.
All right. Well, to end our show, what message would you like to give to the youth of America?
Just that there's hope out there, and hopefully they feel strong and courageous enough to reach out to other people and to realize that that time in their life is so temporary and everything they see and read online is not necessarily accurate. I know for a lot of our kids, that's one of the biggest stressors is thinking they're not living up to their peers. So I think if we have more dialogue and just encouraging them and letting them know that that's not even reality and that they should feel happy and comfortable in their own skin.
Oh, very well said. Jennifer Ponce, thank you so much for being a guest on the California Island podcast.
Thank you for having me. Oh, I hope so.
No problem. California Island, stay blessed.